Desean Jackson's rise from the streets of Los Angeles to the NFL is nothing short of sensational. From gang ties to the gridiron, this talented youngster rose through the ranks and became one of the NFL's most feared wideouts. This is the story of Desean Jackson. His story started with his father and Jackson's older brother Byron. Desean's father, Bill, had always wanted to play sports, but his father forbade him from doing so, ensuring he focused on grafting and building a career with hard labor. So when Bill had his own first child, he wanted him to have what he was never able to have for himself. Bill started to encourage Byron to play sports, and he became a wide receiver at San Jose State. Desean had been born during his brother Byron's high school years, and he watched as his older brother grinded towards the NFL. He did eventually make it to the league too, landing on the Kansas City Chiefs practice squad, but that only lasted a couple of years, and after a short time in both the Canadian Football League and the World League in Europe, Byron called it quits. His decision wasn't a popular one with his father, but after Byron hung it up, Bill turned his attention to Desean, who was always exceptionally fast from a very young age. He was a slim-built little kid, but he ran away from every other kid on the field, and he made it look easy. Desean's father and his older brother Byron hadn't spoken for over 2 years after Byron decided to walk away from the game of football, but it was Desean's promise as a young athlete that brought his brother and father back together. Byron returned to help assemble a personal development team for Desean when he was just 8 years old. They would work on his conditioning and development as a football player, and eventually became known as Team Jackson. Jackson was born in Los Angeles, California, and grew up in Crenshaw. The gang affiliations of rival gangs, the Crips and the Bloods, were ever present, but for now, Desean was focused on football. He trained with his father and his brother Byron, as well as the team built to help him develop, but life was still not easy as a kid growing up on the West Coast. His parents weren't making a lot of money, and things were often tight. They divorced when Desean was 7 years old, and their split meant his mother moved back to Atlanta, Georgia. Jackson went on to live with her for a while, which disturbed the time he spent focusing on football. After a few months, he moved back to LA so he could have the male mentorship of his father and his older brother, and football resumed its place as a top priority in his life. But Bill Jackson was now living in South Central, a neighborhood in Los Angeles that had become heavily affiliated with gang violence in the 1990s. When Desean was just 12 years old, he witnessed a boy's murder, gunned down in the streets in a drive-by shooting. He was enrolled at Long Beach Poly, a prestigious football program considered to be one of the best in Southern California. However, getting there involved an exposure to a lot more gang trouble. The commute was over an hour each way, and according to Desean, involved a walk through gang territory, followed by both a bus and a train through troubled neighborhoods in downtown LA. Jackson noted that he was a witness to a lot of violence and drug trouble at a young age. That was just the scene he was raised in, and sports were the best way for him to stay out of trouble. Desean was always undersized. He was a short kid with a slim frame, whose football pads always appeared to be too big for his body, but that never deterred him from the plan to make it big in the NFL. He hung out with friends who he knew were into some bad things, gang members and friends in the neighborhood, but they respected Jackson's trajectory in sports and supported him in his progression. Jackson was the kid who stood out athletically, and his friends and those who knew him thought he was destined for great things. They kept him close but allowed him the freedom to pursue his football dream. His father, Bill, also gave everything he could to keep his son out of trouble. He was there waiting by the train every day when it arrived to make sure he got to and from school safely and worked tirelessly to keep Desean away from the wrong crowd. During his high school career, Jackson quickly became one of the most highlighted wide receivers in the nation. In his senior year at Long Beach Poly, he put up 1,075 yards and 15 touchdowns, and they would go on to win a state championship. Jackson was a premium high school athlete at this point, who stepped in to play defensive back in the title game and picked off 2 passes, including one that he returned for a touchdown. He was voted the MVP of the U.S. Army All-American Bowl and had a decision to make about where he'd go to college to play football. Jackson's decision ultimately came down to 2 of the biggest schools in the California area, both the University of Cal Berkeley and the University of Southern California. Jackson had offers from all over the country, including SEC giants Florida and LSU, as well as Oklahoma, Florida State, and Arizona State. Desean decided he would attend the University of Cal, choosing the Cal Golden Bears over the USC Trojans. He enrolled with the intent to play both football and baseball, but his football career took off so quickly that he eventually decided to put 100% of his focus into his pursuit of the NFL. In his very first game in a college uniform, Jackson had 2 touchdowns, one being a punt return 49 yards to the house and a receiving touchdown. It was quickly evident that his speed on the field was every bit as dangerous at the college level as it had been in high school. The speedy wide receiver had shown a ton of promise as a freshman, with 7 touchdowns and a big performance in the 2005 Las Vegas Bowl, in which he collected 130 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. His career exploded the following year, with his first 1,000-yard season and 9 TDs as well as 4 punt return touchdowns. He received first-team All-Pac-10 honors that year as both a receiver and a punt returner, and was voted a first-team All-American by every major network. After yet another stunning year, Jackson entered his third year at Cal as one of the frontrunners for the Heisman Trophy. A couple of injuries limited his production that year a little, so he didn't have the numbers to win the prestigious award, but he was still one of the most electrifying talents on the field, and promptly declared for the 2008 NFL Draft. Jackson, who had grown up in a troubled area in downtown Los Angeles, was one step from completing his dream of making it to the league. He'd been working since he was 8 years old to become the most impactful football player he could be, and the draft was just around the corner. While Desean has admitted to having friends who are gang members and some who have done certain things that would be associated with gang violence, Desean himself has never carried out any gang-related activity. Football kept him out of trouble, and he was about to be drafted by an NFL franchise. Jackson was selected by the Philadelphia Eagles with the 49th pick in the second round of the 2008 NFL Draft. He was headed to Philly to team up with Andy Reid, Donovan McNabb, and the Eagles, and he would immediately become a key threat to their offense. He would go on to be the Eagles team leader with 62 receptions that year, marking a new Eagles record for rookie receptions in team history. His 912 receiving yards were also a team record for an Eagles rookie, breaking the previous record held by tight end Keith Jackson, and his 444 punt return yards marked yet another franchise record. He was a Pro Bowler for the first time the following season, as well as earning second-team All-Pro honors in just his second year pro, ending the regular season with 1,156 yards and 9 touchdowns, as well as 137 rushing yards, 441 punt return yards, and 2 punt return touchdowns. He would follow his 2009 performance with yet another superb year in 2010, totaling 1,056 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns, but nothing he did that season would compare to the miracle at the New Meadowlands. By this point, the NFL was well aware of the dangers Desean Jackson presented as a punt returner. So when the Giants and the Eagles were tied at 31 points apiece with 14 seconds left to play in Week 15, Giants punter Matt Dodge was explicitly told by head coach Tom Collin to punt the ball out of bounds. Instead, he hung it right up to Jackson at around the 35-yard line, and the talented returner even dropped it initially before scooping it up to survey the field. He then paused, shifted one way, and then darted up the middle with his electrifying speed, leaving Giants players clawing at his ankles as he broke free. He pedaled into the end zone and walked it off for the Eagles in one of the most stunning moments in not only Eagles and Giants rivalry history, but in that of the league itself. It remains to be the first and only game-winning punt return on the final play from scrimmage in NFL history. Jackson signed an extension with the Eagles prior to the 2012 season, worth up to $51 million, just 2 days after the team applied the franchise tag. That year, he was on track for yet another 1,000-yard season, but fractured his ribs in Week 12 of the season, forcing him to miss the remainder of the season. He came back in 2013 for the best season of his career, setting new career highs with 82 receptions, 1,332 receiving yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns, earning his third call-up to the Pro Bowl. All 3 marks were new highs for the Eagles star, but that offseason would be a turbulent one for Desean. Just 2 seasons after signing his extension and following the greatest year of his career, Desean Jackson was released by the Eagles, sending shockwaves through the league. While rumors circled about missed meetings and other things within the organization, some of the loudest rumors were the Eagles' concerns with Desean's off-the-field activities and association with gang members back in LA. Jackson had been seen as making gang signs at rival players, and while at the Pro Bowl, which Jackson has explained are a sign of appreciation for those certain people who looked out for him growing up. When Desean's father died of cancer early in his NFL career, it was those friends back in Los Angeles that helped him overcome the grief of losing his dad. Bill Jackson had helped his son go from a lightweight 5-year-old kid to an NFL star and always looked out for him whilst living and growing up in a poor neighborhood surrounded by gang violence. Jackson recognizes those people who supported him, regardless of his status as an NFL player. He refused to be the sort of person to forget where he came from, and the signs he used were a reflection of that gratitude. The Eagles took exception to those demonstrations though, and Jackson was cut. So what did he do? Signed with one of the franchise's main rivals, the Washington Redskins. He would get the opportunity to face the Eagles twice a season, and had every intention of making them regret letting him go. In a podcast with former NBA talent Matt Barnes, Jackson claimed that the Eagles wanted him gone, and used his childhood circumstances as a reason to let him go. He said, "You mad at me because I grew up where I grew up and hang out who I hang out with?" And continued to say, "It was kinda like a stab in my back. It was like, after everything I did for y'all, if y'all didn't want to pay me, just tell me y'all didn't want to pay me." So he signed with a rival and spent the next 3 seasons taking every opportunity to get back at the Eagles. In 5 games for the Redskins over 3 seasons, Jackson had 3 100-plus receiving games, and the Redskins won 4 of those games. During his time in Washington, Jackson managed another 2 1,000-yard seasons and 14 total receiving touchdowns. His second 1,000-yard total came in the same game as Pierre Garçon's for the Redskins, making them both the 7th and 8th in franchise history to have multiple receiving seasons over the 1,000-yard mark. Jackson led the NFL in yards per reception that year for the 3rd time in his career, proving how much of an explosive playmaker he was throughout his talented career in the league. He would go on to sign a 3-year free agency deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, worth over $33 million. He'd have yet another 100-plus yard game against the Eagles, and while he faced some injuries during his time with the franchise, he did break an NFL record previously held by Jerry Rice. Jackson caught just 1 touchdown in his 2nd year in Tampa, but that touchdown was his 24th of 60 yards or more, breaking the tie he had held with Jerry Rice at 23. He also became the 47th wide receiver in the league to hit 10,000 receiving yards that season, and led the NFL in yards per reception for the 4th time. After 5 years away from the franchise, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers traded Desean Jackson back to the Philadelphia Eagles in 2019. In quite the story, his debut during the 2nd stint in Philly came against the Washington Redskins, and he did what he's always done. Jackson caught 8 passes for 154 yards and 2 touchdowns as the Eagles won the game. In that 2019 season, he would surpass Randy Moss with his 31st career touchdown of over 50 yards, good for 2nd in NFL history, behind only Jerry Rice. With his career winding down, Jackson featured in 7 games for the Los Angeles Rams in 2021. He requested his release in November, and the Rams went on to win the Super Bowl, and while no longer on the team, Jackson still earned a Super Bowl ring for his contribution. He did get signed by the Las Vegas Raiders for the remainder of that season, and made his mark on the team. He impacted a must-win game versus the Dallas Cowboys on Thanksgiving Day. He caught a pass from Derek Carr and took it all the way for a touchdown. That win contributed to the Raiders making the playoffs, which has been a rare feat. While he is not yet officially retired, it seems as though Desean Jackson's days torching defenses in the NFL are coming to an end. He amassed 11,263 receiving yards and 58 receiving touchdowns on offense. On special teams, totaled 1,352 return yards and 4 return touchdowns. He ranks 3rd all-time on the Eagles' receiving leaderboard and holds the NFL record for both touchdowns over 60 yards and the tied record for touchdowns over 80 yards. So, from growing up in downtown Los Angeles surrounded by gang violence at a young age, to stealing records from Jerry Rice and surpassing Randy Moss on long-distance touchdowns, Desean Jackson's story is one of undeniable success. Perhaps the gang signs mean certain things to certain people, but to Desean, they're a sign of gratitude and recognition of the people back home that helped him defeat the odds. With the support of his father, his brother Byron, and Team Jackson, that slender 5-year-old who could run like the wind became a star, and while he shone under the bright lights of the NFL for many years, he never wavered on remembering where he came from. Unapologetically himself, Desean Jackson will forever be one of the most explosive talents the league has ever witnessed. Thank you for watching The Halftime Show.